Good morning. How are you today? So I hope everybody's doing well, and I hope you are having a good weekend. So we are at Sunday, which means we get back to the real grind tomorrow. However, for today, we will be discussing The Evil Lives Here, episode 4, season 1, episode 4, The Prophet. And I'm just going to say there's really no trigger warnings here. It is just basically about a cult, which I struggle with. I'll just say this up front. I struggle with the fact of one person being able to influence somebody so much that they completely change their life, give up things, and follow leaders sometimes to do things that we all know is bad. So I do struggle a little bit with that, but we'll get right into this. We have a Mr. Bowie down at the bottom having his morning breakfast. Calypso, she's actually, oops, sorry guys, right beside him, but she's been whiny this morning. So if you hear some whining, you know what it is. So my face is prepped, and we're going to start with the eyes, and let's get to it. Okay, so we start this episode with a gentleman sitting at a table all by himself with a laptop in front of him. And then we hear some speaking. So as I've mentioned before, Evil Lives Here does a really good job of giving you audio and video when available. So we're hearing someone speak, and they say, yes, Pixi, that's what they said. They said, quote, "I am not a false prophet. Therefore, I am not worthy of the penalty sought by those that seek my death." End quote. So I don't know. I'm assuming this quote actually has more to do with the ending of the story than the beginning. But whiny. But in typical fashion, Evil Lives Here likes to lead up to something like that. So we'll probably get back to that here towards the end. So the guy says he actually hasn't heard this voice in 30 years. And it's not the voice of the guy that he remembers, that he considered a friend, that he loved like a brother. So we know there's a past between them that led up to prior whatever happened here. So then we find out the guy that we're listening to, his name is Kevin Curry. And he is going to take us on this journey and just, tell us this story. So now we go to news footage, and the news footage shows a lot of police in what looks to be a farmhouse, which later confirms it is a farmhouse. And the news is reporting that they have found, let's see what they say, they found a body of a man the night before, and that day they found 2 or 3 more bodies. It states that the killer had gagged and duct taped these victims, and then it shows footage of the police taking out the bodies. And I gotta say, as I'm sitting here trying to decide, I know what I want to do, but I have to decide how I'm going to do it. I have to say that I see a lot of footage on these things, and usually you see footage of bodies being taken out, and they're on like a stretcher, or they're in their body bag, but they're on a stretcher being taken out. In this case, not so much. You see 4 people carrying a body bag, and it's really kind of just disturbing because they're carrying this body bag, and it's like sunk in the middle where it's heavy, and they're like trying to struggle to carry it. And I'm like, yeah, I get 4 bodies. You might not have had 4 beds, but I would have taken them one at a time before I made it look like I might drop them. So yeah, that's kind of how it started on our news footage. So Kevin said it was a really hard place to go back to. And that's just to discuss, not physically. He said because he was there, he knew this family that had been killed. Even though he left the group, he went to the authorities about the group. He still doesn't feel like it was enough. And that, I don't know. I won't say I don't think he did enough, but it didn't stop the actions that happened. So I don't know whose fault that would be other than the leader of this group. I can't blame him. I feel like he actually tried. And then, so he is visibly, as he's talking about this, upset and crying. And you get the idea that he feels very, very guilty. So now we go into the backstory. And Kevin says, okay, so he's sitting here and he's looking through a photo album showing him and this guy. And he says he met Jeffrey. He calls him Jeffrey the whole time. In the Navy. So they knew each other a very long time at this point. I guess I shouldn't really say that, but the reenactment people, as I've stated, isn't always quite accurate. But the reenactment makes them look like they're probably in their 30s at this point. So he's known him at least for a number of years. It could be upper 20s, 30s, but he's known him for a while. They met in the Navy. They became great friends. Which is that. Kevin said Jeffrey was the type of person that you would be able to call a friend easily. Said he was very down to earth. He was a good family man. And he loved Jeffrey like a brother. He said he became very close to him and his family. And Jeffrey's, they don't specifically say, when they say family, how many kids or whatever. But they do talk about Jeffrey's wife. And I will say her name is Alice. So, Kevin said he became very close to Jeffrey and Alice. And I know there's kids. I find out more about the kids when I do a Google search. It's never mentioned in this story. So we won't mention it till I do my Googles. Then, in dramatic fashion, because evil lives here, they do the... they don't have a narrator. So, like a lot of the other shows on the ID channel actually has a narrator. This one doesn't. So what it does is it gives you little pop-up. I don't know if like a pop-up bubble is the exact correct word, but it gives these little pop-up information. And it's funny because they're like so dramatic. And in this case, we learned that in April, was it 17th, 1989, Jeff Lundgren committed an act of pure evil. Dun, dun, dun. You know, that's very dramatic. Dogs, they're going to be the death of me. So for this next part, I literally fell down this rabbit hole because Kevin says that they were members of the Reorganized Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, I've heard of the Latter-day Saints. I didn't know anything about anything called the Reorganized group. So I had to do some Google in the middle of the episode. I don't normally do that, but let me just stop and talk about this. And I mean, no offense, this was clearly my not misunderstanding, my not knowing, okay? So it was just clearly a fact finding because I didn't know what it was. And I really got into looking at this, and then I decided, okay, keep it brief. We don't need to do an hour of the Reorganized Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So where am I at? I was curious more on what the differences were. So, Mr. Google told me that the Reorganized Church of LDS, Latter-day Saints, and I'm just going to try to, it's a mouthful, was called that from 1872 to 2001. So it's been around, a while, and I've just never heard of it. It's now known as the Community of Christ, which still I'm not familiar with. It is the second largest denomination of the Latter-day Saint movement. I didn't know there was denomination. I'm just going to quit telling you what I didn't know because I didn't know any of this. They shared common heritage in the Church of Christ, founded in 1830 by Joseph Smith. So, both churches believed in an open canon of Scripture founded upon the Book of Mormon, which I knew the Latter-day Saints, LDS, was a Mormon, but I really didn't know anything else about that. So, the LDS officially adopted the authorized King James Version of the Bible. And it's actually produced its own edition with footnotes clarifying from the inspired version of the Bible, which they say is Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible. So they took their King James Version and edited it to add their footnotes from their leader, or their founder, I guess is the best word, founder, Joseph Smith. Okay. So I started to list all these differences, and it was so confusing to me. I was like, I can't do this. I don't understand it. I don't want to confuse you, and I'm especially not wanting to offend anybody with my ignorance. So I just put, most differences seem to be on their scriptures and what Bible or canon they studied. So they both shared the Book of Mormon, but they had different versions. Like I said, the Latter-day Saints did the King James Version. Actually I do. I wrote it down, but it's two different, whatever. So, Kevin said, Jeffrey at some point became unhappy with the tenets of the church. Again, bam, I grew up in church. I did. I'm not an every weekend type of person. I've been in church longer than I should admit. But I have my beliefs. So again, please, I'm not insulting anyone, but I didn't know what a tenet was. So I did another quick Goog. And I didn't want to fall down another rabbit hole because I literally spent an hour just looking at these two churches and summed it up the best I could for you all in a few seconds. But, so I quickly Googled it and then got out. But what he meant was basically Jeffrey was unhappy with the church's beliefs. So he broke off from the church and essentially started his own version, but then was excommunicated from his church the temple that they were attending. Jeffrey said that he was, I don't know why he keeps repeating this, I guess because by telling us how close he was to the wife and family and how much he considered them a part of his family, it just shows us that what he does essentially or eventually is that, I guess it's just to show us how hard it was on him because he considered these people family. So I'm repeating that, but it's because he repeated it so often. But to get back to what I was saying, okay, so Jeffrey said that he was close to Peter and his family, and when he would visit, Jeff and Alice would start sharing scripture. So I was confused again because I stayed confused in this episode a lot. But because, for one, Kevin says that he moved to the area that they are in is called Kirtland, Ohio. I Googled where that was at. That is up by Cleveland, right around the river. So, okay. But Kevin says he moved up there to be closer to them. found this odd until I found out a lot of people moved to be close to Jeff. And it just quit becoming odd more than it became creepy. Anyways, so he was living up there, and it makes sense he was, because he said at one point that he and Jeffrey went to church together. And there was an LDS temple in Kirtland. And it's funny because when I Googled it, that was like prominent, this temple. I was like, oh, okay, so whatever, you know, it's apparently a pretty big thing. And sorry, I struggle talking and doing this at the same time sometimes. So apparently, trying to piece this together because it never truly says, I'm getting the feeling that Kevin left the church when Jeff did. Okay? Okay. Which, learning more about this whole situation, unfortunately, I do believe that Kevin would follow him pretty much anywhere at this point. So, but this gets weird for me because Kevin's saying that when he would be sitting in the kitchen talking to Jeff and Alice, talking scripture and basically Jeffrey's version of the scripture, he said, this is Kevin, that there was this bright light behind Kevin. There was this angelic glow to him. What else did he say? There was like a door and light and a door behind Jeff. And he just had a feeling this is where he was supposed to be following Jeff. Now, I already told you I had a hard time following, or I have a hard time with I'm having a hard time with this glitter, but I have a hard time with sayings like that. Because to me, I believe in a lot of things. So please, again, don't get me wrong when I say this. But to me, it sounds like someone has drank the Kool-Aid. And it's very hard to take serious, right? When someone's saying something like that, it's very hard to take serious. So, Jeffrey then tells us that he never really had a family in his life. And, you know, this was the first time he really thought he belonged. So, unfortunately, and this is my opinion because I am not, haven't been, never planned to be a professional psychologist or whatever, but unfortunately I just think this happens a lot in these situations where, you know, the leader finds I'm gonna be wearing glitter all day, finds somebody kind of I started to say gullible, and that's not the right word, but someone needy and someone that is looking for this, and it's a good way to draw them in. Now, because I'm having trouble with this glitter and I can't talk and try to do this, I'll be right back. Okay, there is a reason why I don't do glitter. I remembered. So we're just going to get right on and try to remember where I was at because that was a lot. Anyways, let's clean this up while we talk. Where was I? So he was perfect prey for someone like Jeff that wanted to be followed, wanted to be loved, wanted to be, you know, whatever it is that people that lead cults need and find from their followers. Kevin was really the perfect person for that. So then it shows a reenactment of what is to be assumed and later confirmed Jeffrey holding Bible study, what looks like in his house. So we find out that this farmhouse where everything went down at the beginning is Jeffrey's house in Ohio, and that's where people were moving to. So yeah, not a bit weird. But he's given Bible study in his living room, and it shows quite a crowd. And Kevin states, he said, you know, people were coming even from the local temple that they left to hear what he had to say, because he was making scripture fun again. And, you know, they hadn't had fun with scripture in a while, and whatever excuses he was giving, you know. So they had a following, a really good following, apparently. And okay, so they were looking, even the people from the temple were looking for something more. They wanted more than what their current church was giving them, and Jeffrey, in his knowledge, was giving them what they wanted. And they felt, and this is a quote, just like a family when they were with Jeffrey. So so now we're going to hear from another guy. His name is Keith Johnson. And he's sitting there looking at pictures of Jeff as well. He calls him Jeff. So it gets really confusing because I got Kevin that calls him Jeffrey, Keith that calls him Jeff, and then the two names are close enough that, yeah, you get it. I'm on the struggle bus today. So, and I've got this glitter just won't stay on my eyes. I've used glue. I've sprayed it down, but we're just going to have glitter on our face, okay? I mean, some days we just need to sparkle. That's all there is to it. Okay, sorry. Kevin said, no, I'm sorry. Keith tells us he wanted to make sense out of why his life was falling apart, and that's how he ended up with Jeff. So it never tells us how his life was falling apart or what was going on in his life. He just leads with the whole, he's looking for answers, and he hopes Jeff has them. So he moves him and his wife. He doesn't say he has kids. I'm going to call an audible real quick because the gel liner was just picking up glitter and putting it in my eye. So we'll just use a liquid liner and hope that there's no problems. Yeah, it's not wanting to stick. Okay, so Keith never tells us what kind of answers he's looking for. He moves his family, I don't know from where, but he's moved him and his wife to Ohio to follow Jeffrey. Okay. Again, I don't know. It never specifies what any of them do for a living or anything like that. So, okay. Where am I at? Okay, so he said he was amongst those with Jeff, and he had a feeling of warmth and love, and everybody became brothers and sisters. And they called Jeff Dad. Huh? What? And Alice was Mom. Again, signs that something's not right. Okay, so as the numbers grew at the farmhouse because people were just moving in and they were following him. And I guess, you know, it never specifically says. There probably was a vetting process and not everybody was allowed. But in this video, all they keep saying is those more people kept moving in, more numbers grew, and then Jeff had to lay down some rules, which makes sense. I mean, a lot of people, and I know there were kids, it's not mentioned, but I do know that from my Google search later, there had to be some kind of rules. So there's that. And so Kevin tells us that they were discouraged to talk to friends and family that they had before joining the farmhouse. That Jeffrey and Alice were now their new family and friends. Right. I'm really on a struggle bus with this glitter. So I bought 6 that are just gorgeous. Hopefully they're not all as hard as that one. We'll see. Anyways, Keith then proceeds to tell us that you weren't allowed to make phone calls. Phone calls were only allowed if Jeff gave permission or it was his idea. And if you did make a call in those circumstances, they were monitored. All incoming and outgoing calls. So Jeff at this point is really becoming controlling and dominant and doesn't want his people to go outside of their little family and their followers. So we're back to Kevin, and he says he started seeing a dark side to Jeffrey that he had never seen before in all the years that he had known him. So I guess that godly glow that Jeff had always thought he had when he first started following him, that Kevin thought Jeffrey had when he first started following him, has started disappearing. And now he's seeing a really dark side to Jeffrey. And he said Jeffrey would get very angry if you did something without asking for his permission. So basically Kevin tells the story of a friend of his. I guess it's a friend and his friend from Buffalo, New York. He talks about this friend a couple of times. And he doesn't give a name, which is absolutely fine. Protect the innocent. But it really, more than anything, made me wonder if he was from Buffalo. And you'll see, I hope this sticks to this glitter. Later, we see that Buffalo comes back up for Kevin. But anyway, so Kevin was invited by a friend to go to Florida on vacation. And I guess, truthfully, Kevin being a grown-ass man, didn't have family, decided, yeah, he would love to go to Florida with his buddy and spend a week down at the beach. But when he came back, Jeffrey was not happy at Kevin. Just like I'm not happy that my lashes are not sticking and it's this glitter's fault. Dag nabbit. I got glitter in my eye. That's wonderful. So, he said when he got back, Jeffrey confronted him and told him, and Kevin said he was trying to explain, I just went on vacation with friends or whatever, but Jeffrey kept saying, no, you abandoned the family. You went off on your own, you abandoned the family. So, Kevin says, and you couldn't argue with Jeffrey. Said he was always right. You just didn't argue with him. It would actually just do you no good if you did. So, Kevin said that you just never knew what you could and couldn't do. You had to ask Jeffrey for everything. which again gets back to that whole controlling thing. So, Kevin said he started, after the new rules had started, and he started seeing this controlling side of Jeffrey, he was realizing that Jeffrey was really isolating them from their friends and family. Said, they were not allowed to do anything with anyone else but the group. So he said Jeffrey started seeing himself as a prophet. To me, I'm just saying. I'm not even going to say. Y'all know. Alarm bells. So, he started seeing himself a prophet and started calling himself that he was called by God to do something special, which I don't think any cult leader that says they are called to do something special is ever a really good sign. Just call me cynical. God, I've got glitter everywhere. So Jeffrey thought he was the voice of God on earth. And Kevin flat out says, this was an issue for me. Well, duh. Okay. One time, we're back to Keith. Keith says they're in Bible study. And, you're studying the Bible, right? You got your teacher, whatever. It's like a class. It's mandatory for them, too. So they did Bible studies a lot. And Keith said one day, I just asked a question on what Jeff was preaching. Never stated what the question was. He did say I wasn't disrespectful. He said I was just asking a question. Okay. I'd like to think that it was just a question and not disrespectful for what, whatever. But it kind of makes it sound otherwise when he is approached later after Bible study by one of the women that was in the group and told him, he says, you can't talk to Jeff like that. Kate said he was very confused. He says, what do you mean? I didn't say or do anything out of line. He's like, you can't question Jeff like that in front of others. It makes him angry. Really? Okay. Thought that was purpose of a class, learning. You ask questions, but that's just me. So, where am I at? Jeff. Okay, where am I at? The next class they had, Jeff knew that you better listen to whatever Jeffrey said. He brought in, again, Tanya, a little bit dramatic, don't you think? Let's bring a gun to class because somebody asked a question. But he said, Jeff come in, he brought his gun, laid it on the table beside him or in front of him or whatever, and pointed it at the class. So nobody asked questions that day. And I just want to say, to what? I mean, and nobody thought this was alarming and tried to get out. I shouldn't say that because eventually, yes. But at this point, guns being pointed at them, they're not allowed to talk to anybody but themselves. And not only that, Jeff started getting them to, I was going to say, play off one another. But Jeff started getting his spies in the group. So if you said or did something away from the group to somebody, they would go run and tell Jeff. And obviously this caused a lot of dissension in the group, and you just didn't know who you could trust if you trust anybody. And then when Jeff found out, obviously wasn't good, he had a special punishment. And what did he call it? If you broke Jeff's rules or challenged his authority, he called it the session. Okay. And in this session, he would set you in a chair in the middle of a room and surround you by his trusted people. So, I mean, to me, that tells you who you can and can't trust, right? I mean, makes sense to me. But, and then they would start just yelling and berating you and calling you names. And, you know, Keith tells me, he told me that it was a very difficult process to sit there and listen to these people completely tear you down. He said the things they said and did were just awful. But, you know, you sit through it until Jeff decided you had enough. And then he broke it up and everybody went along their way like there was nothing wrong. So then Jeff's preaching became, predictably, I'm going to say predictably, come on, we shouldn't be surprised, right? His preaching became, where am I? He started preaching about God's will and casting aside the weak. And Kevin now is talking. He said, you know, he was completely shocked about this. And Jeff started talking about a group of non-believers in the followers. And what they're going to do about that and blah, blah, blah. Then he starts and he mentions a family by the name of the Averys. Dennis is the father, so we hear most about Dennis. But the Averys were a family, father, mother, 3 children, that also followed Jeffrey, moved their house, sold their house, and moved to Kitland to be with him. Now, at this point, it just leads us to believe that's who he's talking about as the non-believers. It never specifically said the Averys were the non-believers. But it was well known within the group, and unfortunately with the Averys, that Jeff didn't like them. They were okay. He said the wife was insubordinate and didn't listen to her husband. Said the children were unruly and disruptive. And Dennis couldn't control his life and would bring down all of them within the family or the followers or whatever they're called. He'd bring down all the followers. And, just gonna leave it there, right? Keith said, sorry, I was like, what did Keith do? Keith said that Jeff didn't like the Averys because Dennis was weak and confrontational, and Keith said he guessed he just asked too many questions, which we know is a no-no to Jeff, the prophet. I guess I shouldn't be that way, should I? But I am. So, Kevin says Mr. Avery was a mild-mannered person who was led around, in quotes, by his wife. Again, seriously, guys, I keep thinking, though, this is the late 80s, but seriously, whatever. And Jeffrey believed he didn't have the cojones to stand up to her. Kevin said Jeffrey point blank made the comment that the Averys wouldn't make it and be killed. Okay. But the Averys were not the only person Jeff ever threatened to kill. So Keith tells a story of one day Jeff visiting him and his wife at their house, and coming in to talk to them about another follower in the group that was going to have to be killed. Keith actually did mention a name. I completely missed it, rewound it, and missed it again. So I don't know. It was just the way he was saying it, I guess. It was just like, wasn't computing, right? Anyways, so he's in there and he's talking about this follower to Keith and his wife, and Keith tells him, says, well, I'm confused. Why are you here? Okay, no, I'm sorry. This follower was going to be killed unless someone interceded in his behalf, right? Okay, I'll get to that. And Keith's like, okay. He says, I'm confused. Why are you here? And Keith's wife, Kathy? Thought I had it wrote down. I know I do later. Said that she volunteered. So Keith tells us interceding meant having sex or oral sex with Jeff. And then I just kind of went, boom, anytime you have any kind of cult related activities, there it is, right? The sex. The man, the leader, wanting to have sex with everybody. And Kathy has agreed. Okay. Keith is like, he said, I was stunned. He said, I didn't know what to do. He said, but Jeff had a rule. And I guess, yay for rules. That said that the man, the husband, had to give his consent before he slept with his wife. I'm just, eek. What do you say other than eek? So, I need to see. Okay. Jeffrey said, it's amazing what you do when you think a man's life's in danger, and he gave consent. Okay. So Kevin comes back on, and he's saying that Jeffrey's teachings keep getting darker from then on, and obviously this whole interceding with somebody before you kill somebody was something that he was doing regularly. Everybody knew that if you interceded, it means you slept with Jeffrey and you saved someone's life. And then so he was getting manic. Jeff was. He was getting, well, I would say, in my opinion, he's getting manic. But I don't know. It doesn't really come out and say that he's manic. But Jeff started calling himself a warrior, which we're not surprised. I mean, come on. He's a prophet of God, right? And he started focusing on the violent part of the Bible and preaching it. So Jeff got it in his head that he was mad at the temple. So apparently this temple, and I didn't catch the temple's name, I honestly should have, was supposed to be where Jesus makes his return, right? There's a place for him, it's open, it's safe, it's whatever. And that's what this temple was supposed to be. And Jeffrey started talking about how, those that go to the temple didn't deserve to have Jesus's return, and, they were not the true followers of God, not the true prophets of God, and so on and so forth. So he had the brilliant idea that, why did that do that? That's weird. That it just turned really red. I don't like that. It doesn't hurt. I just happened to notice it. So anyways, that he was going to take his revenge on this temple that excommunicated him. Never a good thing to hear, right? But he wanted to kill everybody within a 1 mile radius of this temple. And when I Googled and the temple came up, I looked, and there are a lot of houses and just basic, and that means, okay, so that's what I see now. I don't know what it was then. Okay, I should specify that. I don't know how many houses, or I was going to say it's not just houses, because there was plenty of houses, but it's an area with things built up in it now. Then it says that Jeffrey would have killed 50 to 60 people, targeting a radius of 1 mile around the temple to protect the temple, so when Jesus returned, it would be his, and he would control that return and get the glory from God and so forth. Okay, yeah, we all know that makes perfect sense. So yeah, so he had it in his head that's what he was going to do. And Kevin is telling the story of Jeffrey calling in some of his trusted advisors. Kevin said there's about 16 of them that were in there, himself included. It doesn't mention Keith, and it doesn't show Keith's reenactment actor. So I don't know if Keith was considered in that group. But, so they're in there, and it looks like the dining room, big table. They're all sitting around it, and Jeffrey, with his wife by his side, is talking about wanting to take out this temple, and what I just told you, how they were unfit and unworthy of Jesus's God's, whoever's return. And yes, I know there's a huge difference in the two, but I don't remember what he was talking about, if it was Jesus or God he was wanting to return. He just kept saying Christ. Okay, he wanted to harbor Christ himself. So he brought everybody around the table, and then he brought out his arsenal. Started bringing out his AKs and his pistols, and he was passing it around. He wanted everybody to feel these guns. And as they were passing around the table, like a school project, he was telling each person their job. So each person had a job, a house, somebody to kill. And he was giving it all to them, laying it all out to his people. And Kevin's like, internally, I was freaking out. He's like, but I couldn't let Jeffrey know that. I mean, okay, I get this. Okay, so you're around a crazy person that's got AK-47s in their hand and doesn't have a problem taking pistols to Bible study. You're probably just going to tell him whatever you want to hear in that moment to save yourself. And I do. I understand that. I get that 100%. I do the same thing. I'm not going to lie. I would have done the same thing. So Jeff said he had to make him believe. Kevin said he had to make Jeffrey believe that he was okay with this plan. That he was going to do it and killed them for Jeffrey, the prophet, right? I get it. I would have probably done the same thing. So, I don't know why I stopped talking. I'm just concentrating there. Then Jeffrey's telling them that only 12 of them will survive this killing. So there's 16 around the table. That meant 4 of them wouldn't survive. And Jeffrey said, in that moment, I knew he planned to kill me. I don't know why that is red. That's bothering me. I didn't do anything different. It's just so weird. Anyways. So he knew he was going to have to find a way to get out. That, and I don't know, there had to have been more to it than just say, just for one day say, oh my God, he's going to kill me. I know it. There had to have been something leading up to it that they aren't telling us, and that's fine. I just think, you know, he's brought you in this room and he's talking about his plans and giving you an assignment. Did he really? I don't know, because then he's telling people that only 12 of the 16 will live. So, I don't know, maybe Kevin was one of the 4 that Jeffrey planned not to make it out alive. I don't know. It's just an assumption at this point. I couldn't tell you. I can only tell you Jeffrey was... Not Jeffrey. Gosh, Aaron. Kevin was sure, 100% sure, he was one of the 4 that was not going to make it out alive. So, he knew he had to leave. And then the following morning, he did just that. Which I find so funny the way he was talking about it. He's like, I woke up, I ate my breakfast, packed a bag, and walked away. And if it was that easy, which, you know, they made it sound like it was not that easy this whole time they're trapped there. And, you know, Jeffrey's watching on you, but can't make phone calls. How come it was so easy that morning? So there had to be a little bit something else going on that morning that Jeffrey planned for, Kevin planned for. Maybe Jeffrey's having Bible study and he just skipped out on it. I don't know. He just said he just walked away. He said he called his friend from Buffalo and asked him to buy him a bus ticket. He did. He got on that bus, went to Buffalo, and never went back. Good for you. Good for you. So he didn't tell anybody. Nobody he was leaving. He didn't tell anybody where he was going, anything. So basically they would have just woke up and he would have been gone. And again, kudos. That's the only way you're going to be able to do that and get out, I think. So Kevin comes back on and he's talking and he's like, you know, I was terrified. He said, I was just terrified that... Did I do it again? Kevin comes back and talks about how he was just terrified and paranoid that Jeffrey was going to search him out and find him. Said he wouldn't leave the house for a month. And he was happy. He was okay with that. He was trying to get on with his life. I don't know how. If you don't leave a month, how are you surviving? Who are you living with? Anything like that. And it's not mentioned. And again, that's okay. So, Kevin says, and now we jump to Keith, and says that from time to time, Jeff would come around and start asking if anybody had heard or seen from Keith. If anybody had heard or seen from Kevin, which he hadn't. Keith said, you know, he did a great thing. He ran and never looked back, never told anybody, never contacted anybody. He said, if you are going to do it, that's how you do it. But apparently it drove Jeff mad. He wanted to know where he was at. He would ask all the followers, had you heard from him? I just want to make sure he's okay. Let him know that everything's okay between us. I forgive him, that kind of thing. Keith then says he is 100% sure that if Keith ever showed back up, Jeff was going to kill him. I think I said that wrong again. Y'all probably think I'm an idiot. Keith said he was 100% sure that if Kevin ever showed back up, Jeff would have killed him. That's what I meant to say. So, we're back to Kevin, and he's saying that he had lived like that for about a month, just paranoid, and then finally realized he needed to call the FBI. He said, so I did. He called the FBI to tell them of the, what was the date? May 3rd date that Jeffrey had planned to use to kill everybody within a mile of that temple. He said, I had to do it. He said it was just, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Good on you. So now, Kevin has called the FBI. May 3rd is when Jeffrey had told everybody that he was going to kill told his followers they were going to kill everybody within a mile radius of the farm, or the temple. God, I need to take a minute and just think. So then we get back to footage of the farmhouse. Okay, this is actual police footage, and it's abandoned. There's nobody. There's nothing. You can see where everything was packed up, and then just trash and stuff that was just hastily left laying around. And nobody knows where they went. So now we get to meet Detective Ron. He is retired, but he was a cop in the police force at this time at what is it? It's in Ohio. Kirtland Department. The Kirtland, Ohio. So, and he's just saying, they were all confused. He said they had no idea where they went. Things were taken quickly, left behind. Just every one of their followers were gone. So Kevin had no idea that this had happened or anything was going on, because he didn't hear from the FBI or the cops or anybody for 8 months. So he's thinking, here's this huge killing spree that Jeff wants to go on. So he's watching the news. When May comes around, and he's watching to see if it happened. And it didn't happen, so he's like, okay, I must have stopped it. I did something right? Well, he did. He did something right. Something right by informing the FBI and calling them and letting them know, and so on and so forth. So 8 months goes on, and he finally gets a call. And it's the police department, not the FBI, but the police department from Kirtland calling him to tell him they had found the bodies. So he's pretty distraught at this time when he's reliving, this. And they don't really tell us much other than they have found bodies. And it goes back to the very beginning when you see that they had found 1 body the night before, 3 the next day. So it had been 8 months since Kevin had called the FBI and tried to warn them that something was going on. 8 months since Kevin and his followers had disappeared. The police told Kevin that they found these bodies in the barn, and that Keith had given the cops the tip to find them. So now we know that Keith somehow had escaped and went to the cops himself. Keith comes back and says that he fled the group and went to the police. 8 months earlier, when Kevin had gone to the FBI, Jeff had called everyone together for a meeting. And when they got to the living room, and when everyone showed up in the living room, Jeff told them the Averys were dead. He didn't attack the temple. Instead, he killed 5 of his own followers. He killed Dennis, his wife Cheryl, and the 3 daughters. He shot them and threw them into pits in the barn that he had his followers dig for him. So not everybody in the room knew that this was happening, so they would have been innocent, but he had a group of people that were with him when this happened, or knew about it, and we'll get to that when I do my Google. Keith said that Jeff actually was not remorseful. That was a little hard to say. He said actually he was gleeful, very happy about it, and he told everybody he wanted to go around the group and get everyone's feelings on what happened. Jeff said no one could tell them that they disagreed, because you didn't tell Jeff. You disagreed with him. That just didn't happen. He said no one complained or commented. Jeff said it was really hard because he was disgusted. So after the murders, Jeff took his followers and fled. Never says where they went or what they did. He said 8 months later, after they fled, Keith led the police to the graves. So I guess he hung out with them for 8 months before breaking away and then going to the cops. The news coverage says it took 8 hours to dig through the floor and exhume these bodies. So apparently they buried them in these pits, covered them up with flooring, and left them. So now Officer Ron is back, and he's talking about that cold morning in the description of finding these bodies. The smells, the feels, the mud. It had been raining. It was all muddy. It was so hard. And there's a video showing them digging in all this mud. And he said when they found the bodies, he said they still stunk. They'd been buried. So they still had the stench, but they had duct tape all around their face and their hands. They had been shot multiple times. Jeff went crazy on these people. And Keith actually told us Jeff's version of it, which I did not write down. I just didn't. But it was, Keith tells us, he killed Ron first, then the wife, and then the daughters, and how they did it. And it was just, I didn't, because the daughters, it was just absolutely awful. So Kevin, coming back to him, when he found out it was the Averys, he was just distraught. He tried to warn the police about Jeffrey and his followers. He tried to do the right thing. He said the Averys were a nice family. They only wanted to follow Jeffrey like the rest of the group, and it led to their demise. Yeah. So Jeff Lundgren was charged with 5 counts of murder. It never says, like I said, never states where he ran to, how they caught him, how long he'd been on the run. It just goes right to he was charged with 5 counts of murder. And then Jeff defended his actions. And I took this as he was his own lawyer in the trial. And I think that audio that we heard at the beginning where he was a prophet of God and could not be, I don't have it in front of me, could not be held to the standards of a mortal man, basically, because he's a prophet. He's the voice of God. So then it jumps and tells us, so this was in 1989, and it jumps, the next time jump, it just tells us that in October 24th, 2006, Jeff Lundgren was executed for his crimes. So we just kind of boom, boom. The 12, I guess, that were going to survive the temple, 12 other of Jeff's followers were convicted for their roles in the murders, including Keith's wife, Kathy, who wouldn't leave when Keith ran. So when Keith ran, his wife wouldn't go and stayed loyal to Jeff. It actually showed her picture. When you go in prison, they take your picture and all that. They showed her picture. They showed all 12 of the people's pictures. Hers was included. And I mentioned that for a reason we'll get to in a minute. So Keith is now talking about what they could have done differently. How he was, what he could have done differently, and how he has to live with himself in these murders. And I don't know, could have done anything different? Could Keith, could Kevin, could any of them done anything different? Because Jeff was a madman. It's just plain and simple. But they have to live with it. He said he is sorry the Averys lost their lives. They didn't deserve that. They were a nice family. They just misplaced the trust they had in Jeff, and it was their demise. Kevin says he also struggles with it, obviously. He thought he and Jeffrey were friends, were brothers. They were family. And he said it really hurt him when Jeff did what he did, and then when he had to leave the group because he felt his life was in danger. And he said leaving the group, calling the authorities, just wasn't enough to save the Averys family. So now, it pretty much ends on Keith and Kevin talking and how remorseful they are. So then I go to Mr. Goog. And I learned some interesting things. Jeff had 4 children. Damon, Kristen, Caleb, Jason. Damon was involved in the killings of the Avery family and part of the followers. There's nothing on Kristen, so I did not look further. She deserves her peace and privacy. Caleb is an alleged child abuser. There's a whole case on him. And a known meth user and seller. And then Jason is the 4th child. And there's also nothing known, so I did not Google. He deserves his privacy. He's been, the 2 kids that they're not like in jail or accused of things deserve their peace. There was a report that Jeff was abusive to his wife, which I can see that. I mean, it makes sense for everything that was done. And I have to wonder if he was abusive to the kids as well. Maybe not Damon, he was a follower, but the younger ones. Damon, I think, was quite a bit older. I'm not really sure. I didn't get ages. So, you're not going to know all these names, but I'm going to tell you the ones that were convicted and so on and so forth. So, Alice, the wife, was sentenced to 150 years to life in prison. She was convicted of 5 counts of aggravated murder and kidnapping, which I found this very interesting because of the ones that were, she was not there. But she helped in the planning, she knew about it, and she kept the other followers away while it was happening. So she was integral to this. Even though her defense team tried to get her out of it, she was integral to what happened. Then Damon, the son, was sentenced to 120 years to life in prison, convicted of 5 counts of aggravated murder and kidnapping. I want to go back to Alice. I'm sorry. She's currently 63 years old. She's eligible for parole in 2092. Means she will not ever get out of prison. She'll die in prison. Damon is currently 44 years old, so he's younger than I am. And he's eligible for parole in 2098 as well. And I don't see him ever getting out as well. Then there was somebody named Ronald. He was sentenced to 170 years to life for the 5 counts aggravated murder and kidnapping. He is 54 and eligible for parole in 2048. He very well could get out. Daniel, 50 years to life for 3 counts of 3 counts. So he was just convicted of the kids. Aggravated murder and kidnapping. Their current age is 50. He's eligible for parole in 2024. So yeah, he has the possibility of being out of parole very soon. There were 8 other followers that pled guilty. They completed their sentence and have been paroled. So 8 of these people are out in the world. Makes you all warm and fuzzy. Hopefully they're not still in Ohio and haven't moved to Kentucky. Okay, so there's no mention that I could find of Keith's wife, Kathy. So she might not have been involved in the murders. You know, she was convicted of something else because it showed her picture. But she didn't want to leave Jeff. She was very loyal to Jeff. So there's that. Now, we are going to talk about the Averys. So real quick, I'm going to insert a picture of the family. Okay, so Dennis and Cheryl Avery were from Independence, Missouri, and moved to Ohio to follow Jeff Lundgren. They had 3 daughters. Trina was 15, Becky was 13, and Karen was 7 when they were murdered. It is said that even though Jeff didn't like the Averys, and in all indications, everybody knew, and he put them down, he said some horrible things about them, he told his wife, Alice said in one statement, that the reason he kept them around for as long as he did is he wanted their money. So, again, it makes me wonder how they lived, what they did for a living, so on and so forth. It was never mentioned. I didn't Google into that because I'm sure there was, he might have had family. I don't really know. It just doesn't say. The Averys were murdered on April 17th, 1989. So that is the horrible, disgusting story of Jeff Lundgren and his followers. He called himself a prophet, and those followed him. And that's where I just have the problem following someone blindly, saying that they're a god, and or a prophet can hear God's voice, and he talks to him, whatever. I find that's very difficult to swallow. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the story. I know I stumbled all over myself today for some reason. I don't know why. I think it was just too many K's. It was just Jeff and Jeffrey. There was just too much. But anyways, it was a sad story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please like and share. And don't forget to subscribe. I would love to have you follow me. Let me know your thoughts. And until next time, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.